Hello everyone, welcome to a new chess video. In this video, I'm going to show you a system that you can use in all your chess games. Yes, that's right, in all of them. It's super easy to play, and on top of that, it has some spectacular attacks. We've seen some similar systems on the channel, but the system you're about to see is one we've never covered before. We can play it no matter what our opponents play. That's why it's such a good system. For example, let's suppose black plays the most natural response here, knight to f6 after pawn to d4. It's also possible to play d5, e6, whatever you want, because our system is always going to be the same. You remember the London system, the Kali system? Well, they're all systems that basically belong to the same family, but each of them has its own variations. And for me, this one is the best of all. We're going to start with the move knight to f3, okay? This move will allow us to set up our system. After, say, e6, remember, you can play this no matter what your opponents play. You just need to remember a couple of nuances that I'm going to show you, and with just that, you'll be able to play it against any opening in the world. We're going to play e3. You know that in the London system, we developed the bishop to f4 first before closing the pawn structure. In this opening, what we're going to do is keep this bishop inside for now so we can play e3 and whatever our opponent plays, for example, d5. You know, at some point, they're also going to play c5. Let's see what we need to do. We're going to play bishop to d3. What we're doing is setting up a structure. What does the structure mean? It means that no matter what they play, we're going to place our pieces in the same way. That's why it's so simple. And we only have one thing left to do. Castle. Sorry, two things. Castle and develop this bishop via fianchetto. We just have to do that. And then the attacks will come naturally. Let me explain. Here, for example, if they already play c5, you need to remember one thing. Don't castle right away. Whenever they play c5, you should play b3 in this system. Very important. Why b3? For two reasons. The first is to develop the bishop, but more importantly, to prevent them from advancing this pawn. This is extremely important. If now, for example, we play knight from b to d2, this knight is going to develop here. I'm already telling you where it's going to go. That wouldn't be possible now because they would push this pawn forward and force our valuable bishop back, and we want it on this diagonal to target the opponent's castling. So, one thing you have to remember, whenever they play c5, it's that simple, okay? Just play b3, that's it. All right, your opponent will keep developing their pieces. For example, knight to c6. What are we going to do? Bishop to b2. As you can see, the system is always going to be the same. The pieces will be developed in the same way, will castle, and this knight will come to d2. Once we have this set up, our attacks will simply come, and they'll always come in the same way. For example, bishop to e7, castle. They might try to develop their other bishop over here, which is usually a very good idea. And we're going to develop our last remaining piece, the knight from d2. Do you see this position we have here? That is, you should memorize this piece setup, because in every single one of your games, you should set up this system. Of course, whenever you want to play it. And from here, since you're always going to play the same setup, you'll have the attacks completely memorized and you'll always be able to carry out the same attacks. For example, if black castles, here we could play 1,000 different things. We always want to place a knight on e5, which is going to be super powerful. This knight on e5 allows us, as Nimzovich used to say, to place our knight on an advanced outpost. From this advanced outpost, it controls a ton of squares. In other words, if they don't get rid of this knight, it's going to be absolutely decisive. Whenever they try to get rid of this knight, you're going to be really happy. Why? Because after knight takes knight, you can recapture with this pawn here, always supported by the bishop. The knight will have to retreat, and we'll have this super strong pawn that won't allow the opponent to defend their castling. So here, we basically have all our pieces attacking, and we'll be able to launch an attack very easily. Our opponent's castling. So we come to a conclusion. Is it a good idea to trade off this knight that we placed on the advanced outpost? Well, no. For black, it's not a good idea. Right. So we have a super strong knight here. Very good. If they capture it, great. But if they don't, chess teacher, how should we continue? Very good. For example, the bishop comes over here, a completely normal move, develops their last piece, and now, since they haven't captured this knight, what we're gonna do is reinforce it with this pawn. So now, if they capture, it would actually be even better for us because we would recapture with this pawn here, and it would be exactly the same as before, but we would also bring the rook into the attack. Therefore, remember well, this knight here is super safe. They can never get rid of it. If they do get rid of it, thank you very much. All right, so if they don't get rid of it, they can keep playing whatever they want. There's something you need to keep in mind, and this is extremely important, so pay attention now if you're doing something else. Whenever they place a major piece, that is, a queen or a rook, on the c file, the two clearest examples would be queen to c7, or, for example, rook to c8, both would be very good moves. We absolutely have to play a 3. You just need to remember this. When they place a piece on the c file, you must play a3. If you do not play it, and for example, you play king to h1, a move that does not really do much right now, but I am just using it as an example, they could simply, for instance, capture here and then bring in the knight, which together with the rook would be deadly. To threaten this bishop, which we don't want to lose because it's a deadly attacking weapon. And now, if we move it, they would simply capture this pawn here. So, it's really that simple. When they place a rook, let's sit this back as it was, a rook or a queen on the c file, you simply play a 3, and they'll never be able to jump in with the knight. So everything is well defended. Very good. How could the game continue? Well, here, notice that the black pieces can't really do much. If they capture this pawn, perfect. We recapture and the problem is solved. If they capture this knight, perfect. The problem is solved as well, so they can't make any progress. And what's more, we have a very strong attack. We have a knight, a bishop, the other knight can also join in, and the queen can come too, usually by going queen to f3 and then queen to h3 to place both pieces here. Then, for example, you can drive away this knight and launch a spectacular attack on your opponent's castled king. But here, black does have a plan, which is what they usually do, but it's the wrong plan, my friends. It's the wrong plan. You'll be able to win very easily when they do this to you. The most common move in this system for black to defend is knight to d7 to come and attack this knight, and especially to be able to attack it with the pawn or even to close with f5. Well, friends, when they play knight to d7, we speed up the attack even more, and I assure you, this is a move you'll see in many cases, I guarantee it. If not, the attack will be the same, okay? Queen to f3, queen to h3, you can even push the pawns, bring the rook into the attack, you can do whatever you want. But, for example, what happens if they play knight to bd7? Chess teacher, you haven't explained that to me. Well, it's super simple. Pay attention to this. This bishop is attacking. This bishop is also attacking the king side, so we have both bishops attacking. But okay, chess teacher, I see this one is great, but this one is blocked by the pawn and the knight. Well, look how simple it is. I trade off the knight, and now I trade off the pawn. And now we really do have a textbook position. Both bishops, like two knives, are threatening the opponent's kingside. And here, we've already won the game. There would probably be many winning moves here. For example, the queen could come straight in here to threaten mate and create holes in the defense. The queen could come here to threaten, mate, we could bring in the knight or the rook. But simply, here we already have a series of winning moves, and it's the bishop sacrifice. Bishop takes h7, check, practically forcing them to capture the bishop, because if they move over here, we'll simply end up checkmating with the queen. So they should capture this bishop, and now the sequence is this. It's very straightforward. Queen to h5, check. The king has to move back, there's no other option, and now comes the other bishop sacrifice, threatening mate, so this one must be captured as well. There's no doubt about it. And then we simply check. Forcing the king onto the h-file, there's no other way, it doesn't matter where he goes, because now rook to f3 and checkmate is absolutely unstoppable. The only thing they could do would be to sacrifice material. So as you can see, here we would already have the game won. it's very likely that they'll try the following. For example, what we do is, no matter what our opponent does, we just set up our pieces according to our plan. Remember, when they advance to c5, play b3 and not much else. For example, earlier we saw that the bishop was developed to e7, but it can also be developed to d6 in a slightly more active way since it's defending this e5 square that's so crucial for our knight. And you remember that, right? Very good. Once they play bishop to d6, does it matter to us? But now, not at all. We should keep playing as we know. Castle, knight to 7. That said, our opponent might try to open up the position. How can they do that with the move e5? Is it possible to play e5, ma'am? No, because thanks to our bishop, this pawn would be attacked by 1, 2, and 3 pieces. So they would lose a pawn. And not only that, they'd lose a piece too, because we'd hit them with a huge fork on the knight and the bishop. That's why, if they want to play e5, they have to prepare it. For example, castle, we finish our setup, and now, just to say something, they could play queen to e7, rook to 8, right? What's the idea? To play e5. What should we do to prevent e5 now that they can already play it? Because they have 3 pieces defended it. Simple, as always, we put the knight right here in front. That's our key move. Remember, if now our opponent wants to play, for example, knight to b7, you remember, right? We can trade here, and open up the lines for the bishops. And thanks to these 2 blades, we'll end up delivering checkmate, right? But what happens there? It could be that they don't do that, and for example, they put a lot of pressure on this knight with queen to c7. Well, we defend it with f4, you remember, right? And now we've got deadly attacks here. They might try to play knight to d7 like before, or maybe they won't. Doesn't matter to us. Whether they do it or not, we're going to win the game. For example, now what happens if they capture this pawn? You need to know this. Do we capture with the bishop or with the pawn? Always with the pawn. That way we open the e-file for our rook, our queen, and to defend our knight on n5. But here, many of you might have noticed and been very sharp, and if not, that's okay, because I'll explain it to you right now. And you might have realized that now black can actually play knight to d7, and in fact, it looks fantastic, right? They can then play f6. Why? Because now we don't have our exchanges to open up the bishop, since the c-pawn doesn't exist anymore. It's been traded off. So how do we need to play to win the game? Well, don't worry, because it's just as simple as before. Our sacrifices work almost every time. Bishop takes h7, just remember, sorry, I can't talk. Think about the attack you need to make at each moment. King takes bishop, and now we simply bring in the king, check, and now instead of coming in here with the rook and the queen, we make it even easier thanks to having the knight here. We take this pawn here, check, the king has to move, and honestly, it doesn't matter at all where it goes. Why? Because what we want to do is bring in our rook and deliver checkmate on the next move. In fact, we could even take the rook, right? But it's much better to play rook to f3, and as always, we win again with this awesome kingside attack. As you can see, this system is incredibly lethal, but there are some nuances you obviously need to know. Alright, when they capture this pawn here on d, do you remember I just told you that you should recapture with the e-pawn? This is extremely important. There are pros and cons to them capturing us here. The real downside, and the most important one, is that it locks in our really good bishop, right? Gets locked in because we have a pawn here, and this pawn can't move. But it also has a really good upside. It opens up the e-file for our major pieces, for our queen and our rook. And let's see how we can really take advantage of this in a fantastic way. Very good. You'll reach this position thousands of times. Sometimes they'll capture you, sometimes they won't. What you need to know is that whenever they play knight to d7, you should try to go straight for the attack. It's one of the few ways black has to try to make progress, placing this knight on d7, and so we must attack immediately. In the first idea, we saw that when they played knight to d7, we could exchange here, and sacrifice. In the second idea, we saw that we could simply bring in the queen and take here, but the rook was here. So now it seems like black has everything defended, because first of all, what do they have? The rook is defending this point, and secondly, the bishop is trapped. So here, it really looks like we have no way to make progress. But don't worry, because there's always a way to move forward. We take advantage of the open file with queen to e2. If you memorize the concepts well, not the exact moves, but the concepts, you'll do very well. They've opened the e file for you, right? We place the queen on the e file. It's that simple. Now, it's true that we're giving our opponent time to chase away this knight. But here, I'm going to show you a finishing move that'll give you goosebumps. You're going to love it. The winning move here is knight to g6, double exclamation mark, because this move is just brutal. All right, we're forking the rook and the bishop, and not only that, we're threatening to capture this pawn here. Okay, here black pretty much has no choice but to accept this sacrifice. All right, we're down a piece, but we should be able to win the game. Capturing here wouldn't be accurate. What you really need to do is capture this pawn on e6 with check, gaining a tempo. Many of you might be wondering, chess teacher, is it possible to block with a rook? That's a huge mistake, because then comes bishop takes on g6. Check out what an amazing move that is. This rook is now positioned. Neither the queen nor the rook can come to defend. In this case, the queen is most likely right here. Excuse me, why is the queen here? Because we played the traditional opening, the first example, and I forgot to move it from the previous example. But don't worry, it's really the same thing. If the queen comes to defend the rook, we would simply capture the knight. Well, and if the queen were here, we would just capture the rook. It's that simple. Chess teacher, don't give me a load of nonsense. You can't defend with the rook. You have to go with the king. And the lethal way to finish this game is as simple as queen to h3, check. Bishop takes on g3. It's going to be checkmate on the next move, since there's no escape. You're going to love this. We've already set up our system, right? So what are we going to do? Well, we jump with our knight to e5. An advanced post. For our knight, extremely important, very good. Here, a very traditional response that we saw in the first example is, well, we defend this knight with the bishop, just like that. But there are other ways, right? To put pressure on the knight and defend the knight, for example, queen to 7. An example game, playing queen to c7. And here we can already take direct advantage of the weaknesses. I'm sure many of you are thinking, they're putting a lot of pressure on my knight here, but since I already have it on an advanced post, I'll play f4 and I'll be in a great position. Threat. That's absolutely right. A very good move. But we can go one step further. We've noticed the following. The queen has been diverted from defending the knight, and I'm sure many of you are already coming up with ideas. Let's get started. Where are you going? The bishop on b2. And how do we need to do it? By exchanging these two pieces in the center. And the plan is as simple as knight takes c6, we exchange the knight, and now what? We exchange the pawn. Once we've exchanged, it's as simple as bishop takes f6, and there's no queen to recapture, so they have to recapture with the pawn, and their king's position opens up. This was so simple because we spotted weaknesses. The great thing about this system is that we always do the same thing, always the same, and we can spot a lot of our opponent's weaknesses. Whatever they do, they're going to create weaknesses somewhere. So we spot them and attack. Now we can go straight in for the attack, for example with queen to g4, or even better, h5. We're threatening mate directly. They have to try to stop it, and the only way is to play f5. Very good. How can we continue? Well, there are probably a lot of ways to continue here. The first is knight to f3 to jump into the attack. The second is g4, just going wild to open up the whole position and deliver mate. And the one I like the most is actually this simple. I give a couple of checks to bring the queen closer. And once the queen is close, I play f4 so that the opponent's pieces can't get over to defend. And I'm going to come in with rook to f3 and rook to g3, delivering a real checkmate. The good thing about this is that the opponent's pieces are stuck over on the queen side. They can't do anything at all. And our queen and rook are simply going to end up capturing the opponent's king. As you can see, now black hasn't played knight to d7, and it's actually even worse. There's an extremely annoying move when we try to play this system I just explained to you. It's extremely annoying, and you need to know how to react, because against this move, you can't use the same setup as always. Actually, you can, but there's a much easier way to punish it. A lot of people get scared when their knight gets pinned, And what they do is play bishop to e2 to avoid problems. In fact, we already have several videos on the channel explaining that many times this pin doesn't really bother us. And in this case, with this system, right? I was actually going to save this for another video, but hey, so you have the whole picture. And those of you who want to play this system will already know how to do everything. So what happens if your knight gets pinned? Simple, we chase it away. If they capture bishop takes knight, great. Queen takes, and you have the bishop pair, while your opponent doesn't. All right? Very good. But what happens if they play logically? They chase away the bishop and it moves aside. Then we keep advancing with our pawns, forcing our opponent to place their piece on this square here, bishop to g6, and now we keep putting pressure on with the knight. All right, can they save this bishop? No, the only square they would have is this one, and after f3, they'd have to retreat, so they do not have any squares left. So what should they do? Well, any other move, let's say e6, right? Any other move. Are we going to capture this bishop? Yes, but not yet. Pay attention to this. You're going to love it. First, we provoke with h4. What are we provoking? Well, it's obvious. We're threatening that if they make any other move, h5 wins the bishop, right? So what should they do when we play h4? Advance this pawn. It doesn't matter to you, h5 or h6. What for? So that if we advance, they can simply shelter. And now, and only now, when this pawn advances, knight takes bishop is winning. And I'll explain why. Now, after the capture, what happened to this pawn? It no longer has its brother defending it and can be attacked easily. Bishop to d3, and we attack this pawn. Question, who defends that pawn? They can only do it with king to f7. What a sad move, right? And then we could just calmly continue, for example, with c3 to place our queen on c2 and put a lot of pressure on this pawn, and there's no way to save it. There's no way at all, no piece that can come to defend this pawn. As you can see, the only way would be to push it forward, and that would be really bad because after pawn takes pawn, you can't recapture since we take the rook. They'd have to move the bishop away. Sorry, the knight would be even worse. So there's no way to defend this pawn, and this game would be completely won. A tremendous example to help you understand this wonderful system. Knight to f3, for example, knight to f6, e3, they play e6, a pretty symmetrical variation. And now, what do we have to do? Well, bishop to d3, placing our pieces as we always do. Let's suppose they play bishop to d7, something we haven't considered in any examples so far. To show you what? That they can do whatever they want, and we're simply going to do what we always do. They haven't played c5, so we don't have to play b3 right away. For example, we can develop the knight. It would also be a good idea to castle, or to play b3 as well. Really, the order of the setup doesn't matter, right? Always with some nuances. If they play c5, we're always going to play b3. Perfect. They're always going to play c5 because it's the only way black has to counterattack our play. If not, we get a free attack, right? c5, b3, knight, c6. Bishop to b2. This is an example from a real game, so you can understand. Bishop e7, it looks like black is defending really well, and we have no way in. But don't worry, you'll see how easy it is to break through. As always, castle, castle, and now we've got everything set up. The whole structure is ready. So let's think about what to do next. Because it's simple, we always do the same thing. With the setup in place, we put our knight on e5 in the advanced post. Here, they could play a bunch of different moves. For example, they might play queen to c7. Why? Because now this bishop is defending the knight. Do you remember that example I mentioned? Queen to c7, we would trade and then capture here to open up the king. We just saw that, right? And we ended up delivering checkmate. Now, queen to c7 is also a mistake. Black is going to keep making mistakes because they're not machines, obviously, right? So we're going to try to take advantage of them. Why? This is a simple mistake. Even though the knight is defended, this bishop is overloaded. So yes, we trade the knight first, and now the pawn. Why? Because the bishop will have to capture this pawn, and since the bishop can't be in two places at once, it'll stop defending the knight. So here, what happens? Bishop takes knight again, and simply, we'll finish delivering the attack we like so much. How are we going to do it? Well, we're going to do it as follows. The simplest way, Queen to h4 trying to checkmate, and now f5. All right, Now things change again. We can't do, well, those queen maneuvers and then play f4, because when we play f4, they'd capture here and we'd start having problems. You see? So how can we avoid these problems? Well, it's very simple. For example, by looking for weaknesses. You shouldn't play on autopilot, but by understanding the plans. All right, now I hit you with this if you capture me. Now, I'll just give you mate as always, because the bishop will be forced away. But when it stays, for example, sorry, let me continue. If I advance and threaten this bishop, it has to move somewhere. For example, it could come here to try for some discovered attacks with the queen, which seems interesting, but now we really can continue with a lethal attack. For example, let me explain. Queen check like before, we bring the queen in giving checks, and once the queen is in, it's true that we can't play f4 because they'd capture us, but we can play g4. Makes sense, right? If they capture, what would happen? Well, let's see now, because it's very simple. If they don't capture, for example, they play queen here, we capture, and we simply place the rook here to deliver mate, right? But if they do capture, how should we do it? Well, simply, when they capture, what you should do is check here. The king has to move aside, there's no other option, and now it's the queen who comes in to deliver checkmate. And this is unstoppable. Why? Can you think of any way to stop the checkmate? I'm sure all of you are thinking of f5, blocking the bishop and defending with the queen, but that kills you anyway because you lose the rook. So it would still be checkmate. Not every game's going to be the same. Each game will have weaknesses on one side or the other. So what will we have to do? Well, keep putting pressure on with our system. The good thing is that we already have the system memorized, and we're not going to leave those weaknesses because our system will always be the same. And when our opponent creates weaknesses, we're going to take advantage of them and attack with everything we've got. So I hope you really enjoyed this video. I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a like. It doesn't cost you anything, and it lets me know that you enjoy this kind of teaching, so I'll keep making a lot more. A whole lot more. And as always, for all the channel subscribers, I'll see you in the next video tomorrow. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you tomorrow, Frizz. Goodbye.